set out to be the best. You had to be a triple volunteer. You had to volunteer for the Army, no draftees. You had to volunteer for airborne, and you had to volunteer for special forces. Then you had to undergo a withering selection process which eliminated 60% of the volunteers. This is the MACV Recondo School set up at General Westmoreland's order to show other U.S. units the secrets of Special Forces reconnaissance. Physical standards were high and only the rugged need apply. Working with Special Forces guys was a little different from working with regular soldiers. Every man was highly motivated. With those guys, you didn't have to lead in the traditional sense, but you did have to set an example. If you give your all, Special Forces men will follow you anywhere. If you don't, they'll run right over your back and do the job without you. Other techniques taught Special Forces troops are fast ways to get down a mountain, like the rappel, or training with all weapons, sometimes even the 3.5-inch rocket launcher or the 105-millimeter howitzer. The 4.2-inch mortar is a standard feature at Special Forces camps. The helicopter is the reconnaissance team's primary means of infiltration. It's important to understand what it can do. This guy is Ken Kelch. He had already run several reconnaissance missions when he volunteered for this school. Army helicopter crews in Vietnam were reputed to be long on guts, and these were some of the most skilled and bravest in country. Here's the beginning of training on boarding a helicopter by climbing a rope ladder. It seems like it should be easy, but with 75 pounds of gear on your back, the ladder wants to push out from under your feet. And you have to pull more than push. There's no way to get over the rim of the door by yourself. Because you can get in without a landing zone, the helicopter rappel is one of the most effective infiltration techniques. But once you're on the rope, you're committed, and you're going in no matter who's there to greet you. This gadget is called a stabo rig, developed in Vietnam by Special Forces reconnaissance projects to get teams out under fire, straight up through triple canopy jungle. In combat, there are usually 3 gunships orbiting around the extraction choppers, 2 extraction choppers per team. The team signaled with a mirror or a flare, and the extraction chopper eased in over them and dropped the ropes through the jungle. In training, the stabo rig was one of the great carnival rides. And in action, it was a great relief to get in one. You knew, even if you got hit on the way out, at least your body would get home. But it was dangerous. You were a moving target and hard to hit, but you were also fully exposed. And the air crews had to be very talented because they had to do a difficult maneuver frequently under fire. In the earlier system, the McGuire rig, you sat in the rig with one arm cupped. There was a story about a recon man who didn't use the cup. His team was in contact when they got in the rig, and he was firing an M79 grenade launcher. He got hit about 300 feet up and fell out of the rig, but he nailed the machine gun that got him on the way down. That was the problem the stabo rig was designed to eliminate. It left both hands free to fight. Getting in and getting out when it's almost impossible are Green Beret specialties. In a sense, scuba is something like parachute jumping, in that you're in a totally alien world. But whereas jumping speeds everything up, scuba slows it down. In the daylight, it's very colorful down there, with coral and fish, very beautiful. It's also dangerous, and you have to be well trained and keep your head together. These Recondo students are learning small boat training primarily for discipline and teamwork. This type of small boat operation is usually performed at night off a submarine to land small units of raiders. On a jump, your throat gets dry and you breathe in great compulsive swallow. The excitement builds, and each man's excitement intensifies that of all the others. It's hard to believe how wired you are by the time the light goes green. By then, you want nothing more than to get out that door. When it goes like a freight train. Then it's your turn, and you get one quick look at the sky above and the ground below, and you're gone, weightless, slammed through space. Your chute opens and it's just beautiful. Unless it malfunctions, in which case you have to fix it. It's easy to do, but you have 9 seconds to do it perfectly or you die. The difference between regular troop jumping and a halo drop, high altitude, low opening, is about like the difference between driving a lumber truck and a Ferrari. You free fall for as long as 4 minutes, but your time sense is speeded up so that it might as well be 40. It's something out of time. With this technique, a small team can get out miles from an international border and fly their own bodies across it at night, undetected by radar, and land together ready to fight, totally undetected. This way of walking was used by recon teams in thick jungle, many times with enemy all around. Any sudden movement or noise could cause instant death. Recon teams train together on immediate action drill. When contact is made, this immediate action drill can hopefully give the team enough time to get to where they can be pulled out by stabo rig. Special Forces recon teams were usually 2 Americans and 4 Montagnards, or another ethnic minority. Team training was very thorough. Usually the whole team would gather together to train one new man, because in a couple of weeks they'd be depending on him in the world's most high-threat environment. Sometimes those teams would be hidden in the jungle surrounded by thousands of enemy for weeks. Everybody loved the Montagnards, me included. People tend to forget how timid they were when we first arrived in country. Truly a gentle people. There were over 30 Montagnard tribes, each with its... Everybody loved the Montagnards, me included. People tend to forget how timid they were when we first arrived in country. Truly a gentle people. There were over 30 Montagnard tribes, each with its own language. We trained them to defend their villages, and their men became our most effective soldiers. They were probably our biggest success story in Vietnam. Vietnamese, both North and South, were strongly prejudiced against them, and it may be that what we taught them has caused the survival of their culture. We were really lucky that Protestant missionaries had trained some of them to speak English, because there wasn't time to learn those 30 languages. The missionaries were devoted to the Montagnards, and the love that flowed between them was a wonderful thing to see. We repaid the favor by building more schools. Getting along with the locals is really the key to success in revolutionary warfare, for either the insurgent or the counterinsurgent. If you get along with the locals, then you have information, and without that, you're trying to fight a war blind with one hand tied behind your back. One of the things that's hard to explain is how much the people we lived with loved us, and how much we loved them. We were like the Magnificent Seven in the movie, the hardened professionals who came in to show the villagers how to defend themselves against bandits. Special Forces medics became highly proficient in treating tropical diseases. We dealt with yaws, leprosy, tuberculosis, diseases American doctors seldom if ever see. At my camp, Huấn, our medics treated 8,649 cases, trained 12 village health workers, and 20 strike force medics. In one village, we showed them what soap was and how to use it. We also collaborated with USAID and Christian missionaries to build a leper colony. This is Ken Miller. To his right is his adopted son, Pin. On the left is my friend Philippe Drouin, the best jungle fighter I ever knew. Special Forces grew out of guerrilla training teams of the Office of Strategic Services of World War II, which later became the CIA. In 1960, President Kennedy decided that the United States needed a force to fight guerrillas and was informed that there was one already in being. He became the patron of Special Forces. In time, this organization grew to 7 active duty groups of about 1,000 men each. Special Forces first went into Vietnam in 1957 in a small way. In the early 60s, we started training Vietnamese Special Forces, and in 1962 the main outlines of our program started to emerge. Thai Special Forces under the command of then Colonel Tinshai Sirisimpan, now a full general, were our first project in Southeast Asia, and one of our most successful. General Tinshai, as a captain, founded Thai Special Forces after completing airborne, ranger, and special forces training in the United States. His special forces were as well trained as ours, and many of them served with us in Vietnam. The American here is Captain Cruz McCullough. He was later my commanding officer in Vietnam. In this exercise, Cruz is teaching the encirclement of a hostile village and the capture of communist terrorists. The Thais were able to profit from our help and defeat the insurgency that threatened their kingdom. Today, Thailand is one of the most prosperous countries in Southeast Asia. The encirclement technique needs well-trained troops, and the Thais used it to great effect. This lieutenant, the executive officer at Camp Bu Prong, and his Vietnamese counterpart have an agent in the nearby villages. And as a result, they are going to be the ambushers instead of the ambushed. It's much better to know when and where they're going to be than to just wander in the woods looking for them. Intelligence that cost millions to get electronically can be bought in the village for about $10. Strategic intelligence became a new mission in 1964 when the reconnaissance projects began with Project Delta. About 12 teams of maybe 2 or 3 Americans and 4 or 5 Vietnamese. At one time, that one unit was responsible for 40% of the tactical intelligence produced in the entire Republic of Vietnam. So 2 more reconnaissance projects, Sigma and Omega, were formed to operate under the 5th Special Forces Group, and there were several others under the MACV Studies and Observation Group. And the MACV Recondo School was formed to train the U.S. conventional units in SF recon techniques. Reaction forces responded to this intelligence with a hellborn assault into enemy territory. An operation like this is extremely hairy because you're never sure of what will meet you on the ground. Charlie wasn't stupid, and he had been known to stake out likely landing zones with as much as a battalion. On the ground it was hot, and we covered many kilometers. The trick is to get into the jungle undetected. You can do that by not announcing your exact time of departure beforehand. Then you have to vary your route, never go the same way twice, never do the same thing 3 times in a row. If they can't find you, they can't hit you, and you become the ambusher instead of the ambushee. But most of patrolling was a long walk in the woods, and there was plenty of time to think. Under those circumstances, you tend to discover who you really are. You also stumble over a lot of booby traps. This simple punji trap is one of the most common. These troops know that it takes 2 men to carry 1 wounded by these things, and that they are coated with human feces, so they'll infect fast. They don't kill, but by the time a unit has picked up very many casualties from these, it has ceased to be effective. We didn't have much intelligence in those early days, but the VC had spies everywhere. They either avoided contact or massed in overwhelming strength and lay in ambush. The VC, which was who we fought at first, were homegrown guerrilla forces. They were either locals who farmed and worked during the day and massed as guerrillas on command, or full-time units of up to a regiment who fought all the time. Still, they had their roots in the South and were local people. We had just about rendered those units ineffective by 1964, and vacancies in their ranks were being filled by Vietnamese from the North. Most patrols from SF camps were of 5 to 7 days duration, and we usually made a loop of about 100 kilometers. Most patrols were like that. Long walks, punctuated with short violent firefights. We took a lot of wounded, and we usually lost one American out of every 2 teams, about 5% killed. There were few big weapons in country at that time, and survival was largely a matter of skill. Later, when the amount of steel flying increased, it became more a matter of luck. After the firefight, it's time to collect the weapons and the prisoners. Our camp strike forces almost always beat the Cong, which is what they were designed to do. They were a militia, trained to fight against communist guerrillas on their own territory. Forces like that aren't designed to take on regular forces like the North Vietnamese Army. Nevertheless, our strike forces did take on the NVA time after time. That they fared as well as they did is a tribute to the training and leadership of the special forces with them, because they were always, in that situation, inferior to the NVA in both numbers and weapons. Nevertheless, the NVA tried as much as possible to avoid them, and when they did clash, the result often went in favor of our troops. They almost always kicked ass when they met the NVA. After the attack, there was great relief, because it was you who was alive instead of the other guy. Going in, you feel loose and happy walking, instead of lying dead on the jungle floor. Combat in Vietnam provided few moments as sweet as these, a trek through friendly villages with trophy weapons and prisoners. It was a chance to look really good in front of the locals. When we were fighting the VC, our task was to train the locals to defend themselves and to help build South Vietnam into a viable nation. Capturing a prisoner is a rare opportunity to get valuable intelligence and to get back into the jungle with positive information on the enemy's location and capabilities. Later in the war, we sent out recon patrols with a primary mission to snatch a prisoner. The first Special Forces camp was at a place called Buni Now. The troops making this river crossing were part of that first strike force. They were simple tribespeople just out of the jungle, and they were timid. But in time, they became terrific soldiers. We always controlled the areas we occupied. The tragedy was that there were never enough of us to cover all of South Vietnam at one time. As soon as we gained a toehold in an area, it was declared secured and we were moved out and the Cong moved back in. In 1964, our mission was modified and most of our camps were moved to the border. But they were never all contiguous and the Cong learned to avoid them and flow around them. We inflicted heavy casualties, but there weren't enough of us to stop them. Early in the war, we burned a lot of rice hooches. The idea was to deny food to the Viet Cong. It also deprived the villagers of rice as well. The theory was that the villagers would come into our protected villages and we would provide them with rice, but starve out the Cong. With the Montagnards, the problem was that few of them would leave their ancestral lands. So we stopped burning huts and made friends with them in place, treated their sick, and used them as an intelligence source. The amazing thing was that they didn't resent our earlier practices. The Cong had done far worse things. We know the ways of soldiers at war, said one old chief. With information from the villages, we hit the trail again. Meanwhile, of course, Northern Viet Minh units were being organized into the North Vietnamese Army, which entered South Vietnam in 1965. As the NVA arrived, more and more SF assets were switched to provide strategic and tactical reconnaissance and special raiding parties. In the NVA and VC, as in most armies, quality varied widely from unit to unit, from from very bad to very good. Where they had it all over the South Vietnamese was in their leadership. By 1965, the war had become much more sophisticated. The North Vietnamese Army came south with a new family of Soviet and Chinese weapons, and the Americans had developed the most potent weapon of the war, air power. Was called in when we were in heavy contact, deep in enemy territory, and needed some cover to break out. The fighters would pin them down so we could get moving and then lay a curtain of fire between us and them until we could get some choppers in and leave. If the fighting was so close it was impossible to call in an airstrike, or the weather was too bad, then you had to fight your way out on your own, and casualties were double or triple. Air power saved a lot of lives. Special Forces developed a good relationship with the Air Force jocks who kept so many of us alive. Another group of flyers we cared about were the Army helicopter pilots who flew into exposed landing zones to haul us out, frequently under fire. They risked their lives for us on an almost daily basis. This is a pretty relaxed extraction. When you barrel out under fire, the sense of relief is a tangible thing, a feeling that you have gotten away with it again. After the heat of the jungle, the air is cold and the sweat on your uniform dries quickly. You can't tear your eyes away from the jungle below, so beautiful and so full of death. I was pretty calm about it the first time I was wounded. While I was being bandaged, I organized another assault on the hill I'd been wounded on, then walked out with the company, about halfway back to the LZ. By then I'd lost so much blood I had to be carried. This is my friend Larry Dring, who had 5 tours in Vietnam and 5 Purple Hearts. This man died in his arms when he got the last one. He lost all these men he'd fought with for 5 years. The company was wiped out the first day of the Tet Offensive, thrown into combat against an NVA regiment. But they saved the city of Pleiku and passed into legend. This is A424, Cruz McCullough's team. The closest thing to brothers I'll ever have. We never really wanted to leave Vietnam. Special Forces fought in Vietnam from the first to the last for 16 years, and we lost about 4,000 guys. We were about 1/2 of 1% of the GIs in Vietnam and took maybe 6% of the casualties. We probably had more people wounded than not wounded. We earned an equally disproportionate percentage of medals for valor. We're associated in the public mind with Vietnam, but Special Forces has been involved in more than 24 insurgencies, most of which have never become widely known because they were successfully resolved before they became full-scale wars. But Vietnam is the only one we were in long enough to call home, and the only one we still dream about.